Thank you, Ayanda, and good morning to your listeners, and thanks for the invitation. I think that in terms of implementation, the traditional way of dealing with disciplinaries tends to hold sway, as opposed to revised ways of dealing with it, as is prescribed in the policy framework that was adopted in July last year. The only thing is that in terms of the actual implementation and revision of policies to align with that, there is a need, obviously, for training of the individuals operating in that space so that they are clued up, firstly, of what is required, and also in terms of the ability to deal effectively and sensitively with the complainants, so that they are complainant-centered, as opposed to dealing with it like any other misconduct, like plagiarism or theft or any such other misconduct. So there is a definite difference in the way to deal with sexual or gender-based violence, whether it be of a sexual nature or any other gender-based violence or gender-based harm.
Yeah.
So there is a need for that training to actually happen within the institutional spaces.
Perhaps it's worth taking a step back, Doc. I mean, speak to us about what you know about this policy framework that's been released by government. Do you get the sense that it hits the right notes at the very least?
Yes, it actually does. It speaks to a more integrated way in which the institutions need to deal with such complaints, as well as the attitude or the behavior within the institutional protocols that needs to be adopted, so that we can be more sensitive, more efficient in the way that we deal with things. And even in terms of what you had given as an example, having individuals within the same venue it's basically the basis of secondary trauma.
Right.
So the understanding of what is happening in that space is so essential, so that they can deal with it differently.
The difficulty, dare I say, in institutions of higher learning is that it's also a space where a lot of young people are discovering themselves, and often, I'm trying to be careful with my words, but the lines can be blurred when it comes to how relationships unfold in places like universities. How does that complicate your ability to respond to certain complaints once you hear what actually took place in certain encounters?
I think it definitely does, but in our advocacy, we need to provide alternatives. You know, like you get the sense of the majority of perpetrators being males, so it would be male on female in the heteronormative sense, but you also get same-sex type of transgressions. But I think when we deal with advocacy and awareness, there needs to be an alternative provided, and that's where the interventions come in addressing behaviors that are that do not necessarily align with our constitutional principle or value of equality and human dignity and fairness. So that those elements need to be integrated into our interventions. There are obviously other underlying factors that we need to be aware of, and that's why our institution is actually going to be doing research on these underlying factors that has caused an escalation in the consumption of alcohol and drugs, because we have seen an escalation in our GBV-related complaints. So it's really multifold.
Yeah.
It's not easy. It's a complex situation. And so we need to have research-informed interventions. And obviously, those would then be targeted to deal with the factors that are outlined or highlighted through the research project.
Are you able to speak to us in broad strokes, at the very least, about what you suspect these underlying factors to be? Okay.
So currently, because we are in an unusual situation, we've seen an escalation actually about 125-fold increase in our complaints relative to, let's say, a normal year, which was like 49 in total in 2019. That has now increased to 86 to date. And it is really worrying, because I think it's really about the implementation of lockdown within our residences, because that is our hotspots currently. It's also the use of alcohol and drugs, which is associated with more than 90% of our cases. There's also a number of, or a majority of, intimate partner violence, and that would then obviously go with, as you all said, discovering self, but then how do you deal with alternative ways of communication, of resolving conflicts. I also believe that it might have to do with academics and the stresses associated with different ways in which the academic project is being delivered, with increased, like you have continuous assessment happening in our spaces, and so there's more pressure with regards to performance. So with more pressure, more stress, you have individuals seeking out ways in which to relieve that stress.
Yeah. Sure. In the past, we've also found that a lot of people who come forward to report cases of gender-based violence have taken great exception of how long it takes to get to the bottom of what actually happened. That, without a doubt, is something else that needs to be addressed in the implementation process.
True. So what we have done within our institution that formed part of our interfacing with our students, where we got that feedback from them. So the institution has invested in a software package which now enables us to track the timing of complaints, and that is also captured in our policy. So there's very specific time frames associated with the resolution of, firstly, starting with the complaint, and once that is lodged, then the investigation, and from there we do have an inquiry panel, which is something new within the institution, where we have a panel that is comprised of gender-based violence experts. We've got individuals from various stakeholder groupings that then discusses the evidence, and they've been trained up, which is part of the department's framework, that anybody associated with gender-based violence matters needs to receive the proper training within, related to gender-based violence cases. So all of the members of the inquiry panel have been trained up to evaluate evidence, and then from there, they make a recommendation either to the Legal Services Office, if it's a student that is a respondent or alleged perpetrator, or in the case of an employee being an alleged perpetrator or respondent, it goes to the Employee Relations Office.